Welcome to the Summit Exchange. Today, Summit ESC Superintendent Joe Icano and Student Services Coordinator Kristen Nowak will be sitting down and chatting with Dr. Joe Clark, Superintendent of Nordonia Hills City Schools.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Summit Exchange. My name is Kristen Nowak. I am a Student Services Coordinator, and today I am here with...
I'm Joe Icano. I'm Superintendent at the Summit ESC. And I'd like to introduce our first guest for our first show here, which is Superintendent Joe Clark from Nordonia City Schools in the northern part of Summit County. And we'll let Joe introduce himself a little bit more in a minute. But Joe, my first memory of meeting you was back when you were Assistant Superintendent in Barberton.
Oh, wow.
And I remember running into you at a workshop in Columbus. You probably don't remember, but that's the first time I got to meet you, and I've just enjoyed working with you here over the last few years as superintendent here in Summit County.
Thanks. Well, that was a long time ago.
It was.
I worked in Barberton 9 years,
Yeah.
and I've now been in Nordonia 12. I never thought I'd be a place more than 9 years, but I've been there. So it's been a long time.
Yeah. Well, can you tell us anything else about your background before we get into the book?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a Summit County guy. I went to town, grew up in Talmadge, went to Talmadge High School, was a teacher 1 year at Cuyahoga Falls High School as a long-term sub, Springfield High School for 5 more years. I worked in Barberton for 9 years, ventured into Portage County for 2. I was with the Kent City Schools for 2 years.
I forgot about that.
And then came back to Nordonia where I've been for 12 years. So I've been a high school English teacher, a high school assistant principal, a middle school principal, a personnel director, assistant superintendent, now my 10th or 11th year as superintendent.
Wow, great, thank you.
So, all of that experience and leadership skills led to the writing of this book. If the Dance Floor is Empty, Change the Song, a superintendent's spin on making schools rock. So, Dr. Clark, can you tell us a little bit about why you decided to write this book and what was your inspiration?
That's a great question. I think that, first of all, I've always wanted to be a writer. I've always had kind of writing in my blood. It was a love of mine. I told a story the other day that when I went to Kent State, and I was an English major. I wasn't an education major, and I had a minor in writing. And I thought at one point that I might want to be a writer, to the point that in college I was sending out short stories to different literary magazines. And one was accepted for publication, and they sent the story back to me and said, "We love it. Make a couple edits and send it back, and we're going to publish it in our in the future edition." And so I made the changes. I sent it back, and I waited and I waited and I waited, and several months had passed, and finally I got a letter from this, again, a small literary magazine that said, we hate to let you know that the editor was hit by a train and killed. And we found, I'm laughing now, it wasn't funny then. But we found your book, or your story on his desk, and we're taking it a different direction, so we won't be publishing. So I often thought, man, how would my life have been different if that story had been published?
Wow.
So I've always kind of tinkered in writing, doing newsletters and that sort of thing. And then a few years ago, I started a blog, and the blog was pretty well received. I would just, my style of writing is a lot like, I just have experiences, and then I try and decide how might that experience play into the world of education. So I started this blog, got some pretty good feedback, had lots and lots and lots of blog entries, and decided that might make a good book. So I put it together, and it was purchased, and I'm glad it was.
Joe, I brought a prop. All right, and maybe it's not the first thing in your book, but many people probably don't even know what this thing is. All right, and you can get a different version of it at McDonald's when they're actually open. But this plays a little bit of role in your book. If you could tell us a little bit about what that's about, just as one of the themes that runs through your book.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what that is
This
supposed
is
to
for
be
you,
is a
by the way.
sport. Oh, that's nice. Thank you. It is a sport. It actually is a sport.
It's
It says it on the back. Awesome. So my book it's a bunch of stories, and the title comes from my background as a DJ, but I was a teacher, and I was a principal, and I was a camp director. And the sport happens to come from a story about when I was a principal, and one of the teachers in the building had given a student a 0 on a test because he had used, I can't even remember if he used a pencil and was supposed to use pen, or used a pen and was supposed to be pencil. I can't remember, but the student got an 86%, and the teacher wrote 86% B, and then she wrote minus 86, pen or pencil, 0.
Wow.
Got a
Wow.
0 on the test. And I, of course, talked to the student, of course, complained. Parents complained. I talked to the teacher, who said, well, we have to teach responsibility. And while I don't disagree that we should teach students to be responsible, we also shouldn't take off points on a test, because tests are supposed to, measure your knowledge of, measure learning.
Yeah.
And so I made the point that, I think oftentimes we find educators who are more inclined to try and force compliance than they are to try to get kids to learn. And often with good intention, but it's, we have to prepare these kids for college. We have to prepare them for the workforce. Nobody would ever be allowed to be, and you'd lose your job if you weren't prepared. And that's honestly, it's just not the truth, right? I have 3 degrees. I'm an acting superintendent, and I never have a pen on me. I never do. Everywhere I go, can I borrow a pen? I need to sign. Yeah. And so the sport comes from. I think I make a comment that if a doctor went into surgery and didn't have his scalpel, they're not going to give him a sport. Somebody's going to give him a scalpel.
Yeah.
Right. So I think we sometimes go overboard on. Hey, we've got to make sure that these kids are responsible. So they've got to know to put the name in the right part of the paper. They need to know how to, space their papers, and they need to write in pen or pencil, and all those kinds of things, when all of that really is not important.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm kind of interested, 'cause I'd like to write myself too. So it sounds like, you have this blog and you had a lot of entries and just different things that likely inspired you. But when you were writing the book and putting it together, did you ever get writer's block, or kind of like you're kind of stuck on an idea and you didn't know where to move forward to next?
Well, I absolutely do get writer's block, and I tend to go in waves with my writing. There will be times when I will feel inspiration and I'll write every day, and then there are other times when I don't. And I'm not. I guess I'm a writer because I have a book published, but I'm a superintendent.
Mm-hmm.
So, I know writers say you have to write every day no matter what. Well, I don't. I write when I feel inspired. And so I go through waves. It may be years where I feel inspired, and it may be years where I don't. So with this, the blogs all came together, and I put them in the book. What's interesting is after the book was accepted to be published, it was accepted as, boy, this is ready for publish. It's not going to take much, but it went into editing, and the editor really had a great idea to, because the blog entries are all a little disjointed. They're just individual thoughts about individual experiences. And the editor thought, what if we themed them? And so in my book, there's a section for teachers, there's a section for principals, there's a section for superintendents. And so we kind of themed them, and having done that, it required me to add a lot more and to work through that process. So the book that was accepted to be published is completely different than the one that actually made it to publication. This one's a lot longer, and I think it's a lot better. I'm very grateful to the editors, I think, for pushing me to do more than it was.
I noticed along the lines of Kristen's questions, you've got a lot of, I'll call them comical graphs, charts, whether it's got to do with snow days or what you learned in college versus reality. Did the book start with that kind of thing? Is that the kind of thing that maybe you just sort of naturally did on your own time, as kind of Kristen was asking you about?
Yeah, so that was actually the second part of the book. The first part of the book was all the blogs, and so I had a big group of blogs, and it's funny because it was just. I can remember the day. It was one of those snow days where you get up in the morning and it's like 60 degrees, but it's supposed to get down to 20 by 8 o'clock, and the snow's supposed to come in, and freezing rain first. And all the superintendents, of course, are talking to each other about, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I can't even remember what the decision was, but whatever it was, of course I made the wrong decision. And everybody made fun of that, or called and complained about it. And so I sat down and just had this I don't know, just idea to try and graphically represent what a snow day morning is like. And so I came up with I don't write, I got on the computer and I used Word and I made a little design and I shared with some of the superintendents and they're like, oh, that's pretty funny. And then the inspiration, so I'm like, oh, people gave me attention. They're laughing at my jokes, so I'm gonna make a bunch more.
Yeah.
So I ended up making a whole bunch of those things. And that's when I said, well, I've got all these blog entries and I've got all these like comical kind of things. What if I shuffled them together and made a book out of it? That's what I did, and I sent it in. That's what was accepted.
Yeah.
Then going through the editing process, after we decided to kind of theme it, the vast majority of those little drawings came out. They were pulled out of the book, so I still have those for future books. But
Well, we in education know what Venn diagrams are.
Absolutely.
On the other hand, I don't think I've ever seen one related to decision making, and having lived that life at one time, I really appreciate that.
There's some Venn diagrams and calendar.
Yeah.
There's the high school principal's date night calendar, which is if you're a high school principal, you go out 2 nights a year with your wife. Prom and homecoming, right? That's it. Those are the only 2 dates that you're free
That's absolutely
as
true.
a high school principal. So that's illustrated in there.
Yeah. Well, just for the sake of for Kristen and for any audience that's watching, one of the things I shared with Joe when we talked about this earlier was, and I shared this with other people, we've all read books in the area of education, whether it's from curriculum organizations like ASCD, Phi Beta Kappan, and all of that kind of thing. Very rarely, though, do you find books that are educational, this practical, related to your field, and funny at the same time. So I think it's just great. I do want to ask you one question, and it kind of goes back, sort of like the sport issue, because you talked about sometimes we have to have rules that says you need to use a pencil and not a pen, but you need to sort of know when to give a kid the pencil he needs, even if the child forgot the pencil. And it leads to a broader question that I think you mentioned in your book, but I remember hearing you say in conversation, that superintendents, and maybe principals and others, but superintendents need to know when to enforce the rules, when to bend the rules, or break the rules, and even when to rewrite the rules. Can you tell us a little bit about that concept?
Yeah, and that's funny, because this is a discussion my wife and I have all the time, and maybe a disagreement.
You're breaking the rules, aren't you?
Maybe a disagreement. But I really believe that sometimes that rules are created just out of an arbitrary decision for somebody to have power. And so I often say this, that anybody can follow rules. A good manager can follow a rule, but it takes a leader to know when to not follow that rule. And I just think about things as simple as this. You go to the grocery store and there's a 12 items or fewer checkout lane. And if nobody's in the store and you have 13 items, is it really a big deal to go through that lane? Now, some people say, no, a rule's a rule. And I say, my take is, we need to know what the purpose of the rule is. I can absolutely understand on a super crowded Saturday where you're trying to expedite that, then we're going to follow that rule, but you don't always necessarily need to. And so I think these situations come up all the time in education where we're telling parents or we're telling kids, well, I have to make this decision because the board policy says this, or the rule book says that. And what that does is it takes the judgment away from professionals who have spent their career honing those decision-making skills. And sometimes, fair and equal are not the same thing, as we know that. So when we try to treat every student equally instead of fairly, that's when we find ourselves following the rules when we shouldn't be following the rules. We should be looking for alternatives.
It can unintentionally be hurtful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, great.
So I think we have one more question. We're gonna wrap it up today. Sound good to you, Joe?
Yeah.
So, with the title of the book, you said a little bit was the inspiration of your DJing. So in the book, you did talk about some of your DJ experiences, which one of those was for a very famous athlete. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I can, so we'll keep it a spoiler for a little bit. So If the Dance Floor is Empty, Change the Song is all about it does come from my DJ experience, which is this. When I first started DJing, you know, and I'd go to a wedding or a party and I'd put music on and people wouldn't be dancing, I would go home saying, what a horrible gig. This audience is horrible. They wouldn't dance. And it came, with experience, I came to realize that that's not the audience's fault, right? I'm the DJ. If they're not dancing, change the song. Put something on that they're going to like. And it's so true in the world of education too. If I'm in the classroom and kids are not participating in my activity, I can blame the kids or I can change the activity. If I'm a principal and I have a faculty meeting where the coaches are sitting in the back reading the paper, I need to make a more engaging faculty meeting, you know? So that's what it's all about. And I did DJ for 24 or so years, weddings, parties, school dances, and I did a few for some famous people. LeBron James' graduation party was the one I think you're probably talking about. Everybody knows LeBron James from Akron. Well, he, of course, and his party was super cool because, again, this is at the time he graduated, he knew that he was going to be the #1 pick in the draft. The Cavs had already won the lottery, and it was down at the old Quaker Station, you know, and I'm like, this is going to be awesome, and it absolutely was. I mean, he's got huge buffet tables set out with all this different food, and you go up to him, and it's things like chicken nuggets and tater tots, and you think, this is still a high school kid, right? He's still 17 years old, but he had a big ice sculpture and all that, and it was just super fun to see, you know, him dancing with his friends. And at one point, he came up to me with a CD that he won. That's how long ago it was, right? It was a CD, and he's like, "Hey, can you play with this song?" And he had his name and his phone number written on the CD. So I'm like, I put his phone number in my phone just so I can show people, hey, I have LeBron's phone number. I never called it. But I also, throughout my career, I was able to, again, mostly weddings and parties. But I did when Dan Marino was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, when John Elway was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, I did parties for both of those guys, which was just kind of
What a
cool.
great experience.
Yeah. If you remember, like in the old days, the Broncos, there was always a fan that wore like a barrel. He was like naked. You remember the barrel guy? The barrel guy was at the John Elway party, which that was my biggest thrill. I got to meet barrel guy.
Wow. I don't like thinking about the Broncos, John.
No, I know. They and I told John Elway to his face, I said, you broke my heart.
Yes.
Congratulations to you getting into the Hall of Fame.
What a set of experiences.
And what, this is a follow-up question, because I'm a music lover. Is there like a favorite song that you always play every single time?
I talk a little bit about this. I have a huge, wide variety of taste of music because I've DJed for so long. There are also songs that I am absolutely sick of because you play all the time. Like if I never heard Love Shack or Old Time Rock and Roll Again, that's fine with me. But there's a song that I always play at every wedding, which is, it's a silly song. It's Sweet Caroline, and I call that my barometer song. That song is going to tell me if it's going to be a good gig or not. Because right after dinner, as they're getting ready to cut the cake, I start playing a little faster music, Build Me Up Buttercup, or I Think We're Alone Now, and stuff like that. Hey, Sugar Sugar by the Archies. But I always put on Sweet Caroline, and I just look out the audience. And when that part comes, Sweet Caroline. If people are in the audience going like this or singing along, I'm like, this is gonna be a good night. If they're just sitting there, I'm like, oh, it's gonna be long. And I'll still change the song, but it's gonna be, I always knew it was gonna be a harder night if they weren't, excited about that one.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on our introductory Summit Exchange today. We really enjoyed speaking with you, and it was a lot of fun.
All right, thanks very much. I feel
A lot of fun. We'd shake your hand, but we can't, COVID
got a
days.
social distance. I feel a little like Bette Midler. Wasn't she always the first guest on the Johnny Carson show?
There you go. There you
awesome.
go.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe.
And so everybody else, if you're tuning in, stay tuned. We're going to have more Summit Exchanges coming your way.